Beloveds, first of all, I would be remiss if I did not say Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to those who mother and those who have been mothered. I want to start today with a question that has been sitting with me for a while. What do we owe each other? Not in the abstract, not a philosophical exercise. Right now, in this moment, in this country, in this particular and painful season, what do we owe each other? We just heard the story of Shandahar, of a man who could not have survived alone, who had one arm, who could not see clearly, who could not have fed himself or defended himself or made it through a single winter without someone deciding every single day that his life was worth the effort of sustaining it. And someone did, maybe someone's. 60,000 years ago, before civilization, before religion as we know it, before any of the words we use to describe what community is supposed to mean. Someone looked at a person the world might have discarded and said, not this one, not them. We're keeping them. I want you to hold that image because I think it's the oldest answer we have to the question I just asked. What do we owe each other? We owe each other what those ancient hands gave, not charity, not the minimum required to feel like a decent person. Presence, sustained, costly, daily presence that says you are worth keeping. I think we have been trained carefully and systematically over a very long time to believe that the answer to this question is not much. That we owe each other politeness, maybe, good intention, sure, thoughts and prayers when things get bad enough to make the news, but not much more than that. And certainly not when the people we might owe something to are behind walls, behind gates, behind the distance that this country has decided that some people deserve. There are currently two systems that run on the same fuel. The first is mass incarceration. This country holds more human beings in cages than any other nation on earth, more than China, more than Russia, and those cages are not filled randomly. They are filled overwhelmingly with Black and brown people, with poor people with disabilities, with people who make desperate choices in desperate circumstances, and with people who simply have the wrong skin and the wrong place at the wrong time. I know I don't have to tell you this, but it's so important that we keep hearing this. Today, I won't focus on whether someone deserves to be in prison or not. We know that prison abolition is complex, and so I invite you to hold space for those complexities. The second system is immigrant detention. Right now, ICE is conducting raids in homes, in churches, in schools. People are being taken away from their children, from their jobs, from the languages they dream in. They are placed in detention facilities where there is no guaranteed right to a lawyer, where their names are replaced with numbers, where their futures are held, sometimes for months, sometimes years, in bureaucratic suspension. These are not two separate problems. This is one architecture, one logic. The prison and the detention centers are cousins. They were built by the same hands, funded by the same interest, and maintained by the same thing, our forgetting. Womanist theologian Emily Towns has a name for this. She calls it the cultural production of evil. What she's saying is that you do not need individual malice to sustain large-scale harm. You only need habituation. You only need enough people to stop imagining the humanity of those the system has decided are problems. Every wall is a training device. It trains those of us on the outside to stop picturing faces, to stop asking questions, to move on. And move on is what the system is counting on. But here's what I keep coming back to. The people in Shanidar Cave did not move on. They did not decide that the man with the one arm was too costly to keep around. They did not build a system to justify leaving him behind. They just kept showing up day after day, 60,000 years before anyone wrote down a single word about what community is supposed to mean. They were already living the answer. Carrying each other is not a new idea. It is the oldest thing we know how to do. The systems that cast people out are an aberration. We are the ancient practice. I think about the women in the womanist tradition who refuse to let that forgetting take hold. Katie Geneva Cannon, who insisted that moral agency does not begin in comfort, it begins in survival. She was writing about Black women who held communities together through conditions designed to destroy those communities. They were not doing charity work. They were doing theology. They were enacting the belief in real time with their real bodies and their real labor that we belong to each other, that survival is communal or it is nothing. Let me tell you about one of my favorite stories from the Bible. It's about Hagar from the Christian Bible. I think she deserves to be named alongside that man in the Shanidar cave. Hagar is an enslaved Egyptian woman who lived in a Hebrew household. She had no power, no status, no choice about what happened to her body. She was given to Abraham by his wife Sarah to be used as a surrogate because Sarah had not been able to conceive and the household needed an heir. Hagar bears a child, and then when Sarah finally has her own son, Hagar becomes a problem. She and her boy Ishmael are cast out into the desert, into the wilderness, with a little bread and a skin of water. That is all she is given for a life she did not choose and could not leave. And of course, she runs out of water in the wilderness quickly. She puts her child under a bush because she cannot watch him die. She sits down a little way off and she weeps. And that is where spirit shows up. Not before the casting out, not to prevent it, and the wilderness after. Theologian Dolores Williams said, "This is the story Black women know. Not always the Exodus story, the one where you escape and you cross to freedom and the sea parts on cue. The Hagar story, the one where the system that was supposed to hold you expels you and you have to survive because survival is what you do. And spirit meets you there. But the people who cast you out face no consequences, and the injustice just doesn't get resolved, and you just have to find a way to keep living anyway. Williams called this the wilderness experience. And she insisted that spirit is on the side of life in that wilderness, not on the side of suffering, not asking you to find meaning in what was done to you, on the side of survival, your dignity, your life continuing. The wilderness is not punishment, it is not abandonment. It is where you end up when the powerful decide that you are no longer useful to them. And the question that Williams never lets go of, and one I cannot let go of either, is not only about Hagar and spirit or God or universe, it's about the household. It's about everyone who watched her leave. What did they owe her? What did they fail to give? The people in Shanadar Cave knew the answer. They did not watch someone leave, they stayed. We are in a wilderness moment, beloveds. And the question being put to us is the same one that has always been put to us. What do we owe the people the system has cast out? We owe each other the refusal to forget. This is first and foundational, not because forgetting makes you a bad person. The system is really, really good at making forgetting feel natural, even inevitable. But because remembering is an act of resistance. When a congregation speaks the name of incarcerated or detained people aloud in worship in social justice spaces, that is not a formality. That is a counter move against the architecture of disappearance. Every letter written into a detention facility, every prayer that names a specific human being rather than an abstraction, every community that refuses to act like those people are gone because the system has decided that they should be. All of that is tearing at something the system needs intact. We owe each other the truth about what was built and why. Because the people behind these walls are not put there because they were the problem. They were put there because naming them as the problem was more convenient than naming the systems that created the conditions for harm. Mass incarceration did not begin with bad choices. It began with the exception clause in the 13th Amendment, with convict leasing, with the war on drugs, with mandatory minimums, with the deliberate and sustained defunding of every system that might have made incarceration unnecessary. We're talking about education, housing, mental health support, economic opportunity. Immigrant detention did not begin with a security crisis. It began with a decision made by people with power that certain human beings are deportable, that their origin or their documentation makes them removable. The system named them the problem, so it did not have to name itself. We owe each other that truth, even when it is uncomfortable, especially then. We also owe each other presence across distance. And I want to be specific about what I mean by presence because I think we confuse it with something else all the time. We confuse presence with charity, and they're not the same. Think about when Hagar actually what Hagar actually received when she was cast out. A little bread, a skin of water, not even Stanley size, right? Enough to get her out the door and into the desert without her dying immediately. That is charity. It is the minimum required to not feel like a monster while you are sending someone away. It says, I have given you something, and now my obligation is complete. It does not ask where she is going. It does not ask who will be with her. It does not ask whether a skin of water is enough for a woman and a child in a desert. It just hands her the provisions and closes the door. The people in Shanadar Cave did not hand anyone a skein of water and close the door. They stayed day after day, season after season, through the healing. That is not charity, that is presence. And it is 60,000 years old. So back to my question, what could have made a difference to Hagar? Not more bread, not a bigger skin of water, but someone who said, I will go with you. Someone who refused to let the casting out happen without at least bearing witness to it. Someone who stayed in relationship with her across the distance the household created. Now, I recognize that during these times, mail service didn't exist and you couldn't just hop in your car, but there were ways to be connected. And if there weren't, someone could remember her name after she was gone. That is presence. Presence does not require that you can fix it. It does not require that you have the power to tear down the wall or open the gate or stop the raid or overturn the sentence. Presence requires that you refuse to let the distance the system creates become the distance in your heart. One of the cruelties of both incarceration and detention is that they weaponize geography. Just like our reading earlier today, driving 2 days for 4 hours of contact. People are placed far from their families, far from their communities, far from anyone who knows their name. And then the system waits. It bets on distance doing its erosion work. It bets that relationships will thin out and that the letters will stop coming, that the community will gradually stop checking in, that the person behind the wall will begin to feel and eventually be forgotten. And then the system points to that forgetting as evidence. See, it says, nobody came for them. Nobody wrote. Nobody visited. No one remembered. Maybe they really were the problem after all. Charity lets that happen. Charity gave at the door and it moved on. Presence refuses to move on. Covenant that only works when everyone is physically present is not covenant. It is convenience. Covenant is what holds when the walls are highest, when the distance is greatest, when the system is betting everything on our forgetting. Some of you listening today are on the outside of those walls. You can walk out of here and go about your day, and I hope you do. Some of you know exactly what it means to need someone to remember you, to need the community to not move on, to need someone to do more than hand you a skin of water and close the door. That asymmetry is not a reason for guilt. That's not where we're here. It is a reason for responsibility. The question Hagar's story has always been asking is not only where is Spirit? Spirit showed up. The question is, where was everyone else? Where were the people who knew her? Where were the ones who could have said before she was cast out that this was wrong? Where were the ones who could have followed her into the wilderness, or at least kept her name alive in the household so she was not completely erased? Beloved, we are the household now, and we get to answer that question differently. Justice is not something that we do for other people. It is something we practice together. And the incarcerated and detained members of our communities are not a cause to be supported. They are members, which means they give something to us too. They give witness. They give clarity about what the system actually does, which those of us who have never been inside badly need if we are ever going to do this work with any integrity. We need each other, all of us, on both sides of every wall. The people in Shanidar Cave knew that 60,000 years ago. They did not have words for it. They did not have our theology or our principles or covenants written down anywhere. They just knew that you do not leave someone behind, that a community is only as whole as the people it refuses to discard. We have always known this. It is written in our bones, in the archaeological record, in every story we tell about what it means to be human together. The wilderness is not over. The raids are still happening. The cells are still full. And we are still here, refusing together. We have been doing this for 60,000 years. We are not going to stop now. May we hold each other across every wall. May we speak each other's names when the system has replaced them with numbers. May we do the work that love requires, not because it's comfortable, but because we belong to each other. And may that belonging be the thing that no wall, no wire, no silence can destroy. Amen, Ashe, blessed be.